welcome to Auxano Bytes.
Thank you,
Auxano
Brijesh.
Bytes is a show, wherein we showcase the basic elementary things which needs to be there in play. And in continuation of that series in 2022, we are glad to have Kriyang in Auxano Bytes. Kriyang is a chartered accountant with 15 years of experience in the financial services industry. He specializes in onshore and offshore fund taxation and regulations. He's also an expert in FATCA and CRS regulations and assists financial institutions to comply in the geographies of India, Mauritius, and Kenya. Kriyang runs a boutique firm providing support through the entire life cycle of the funds, alongside 14 professional colleagues based in various cities in India and the US. Interestingly, he is an avid trekker, travel enthusiast, and a musician. So I will not say one can assume that he brings a software touch in his interactions. I believe the software touch is there in his DNA, with the kind of things which he's doing besides what he does for his bread and butter.
Right. Thank you so much, Brijesh. It has been fantastic to be connected with you, working with you and your people. Auxano is rich in terms of culture, as I know. And with two funds in place, I believe there's a lot to look ahead for in terms of learning from you and your team. Thank you for having me here. Yes, let's speak.
One thing which we did was, I have got a bias and a lot of queues, but what I also did was I asked my team to so some of the queues would be a combination of what the team has put forth and shared. So besides the normal ones, like today, AIF is seeing a lot of traction. Almost every day there are new, Cat 1 or Cat 2 or Cat 1 Angel AIFs, being set up and formed. So considering this, and since you are an expert in setting up funds across the various categories, tell me how it is now to set up an AIF in India. What is the process or how easy it has become? That's one. And two, what are the requirements and regulations that one needs to keep in mind? And how long does it take to get a license?
Right. So let's first understand what is an AIF. AIF, as it stands, the Alternative Investment Fund. It's a pooling vehicle where the decision maker of the fund makes investments into alternative spaces like private equity, could be hedge funds, it could be real estate, basically all the non-conventional assets that we can think of. And these vehicles are used to garner money from high net worth individuals largely, and then invest into opportunities. Generally, when we talk about category 1 and category 2, and I'll come to that, so what does this mean? We are looking at a long-term investment avenue, typically in the range of 4 to 8 years, depending on the thesis of the fund. And it gives a benefit in terms of a growing asset to the investors, and also an opportunity for the upcoming businesses like startups or real estates who need finance in a different form to fulfill that need, and also make sure that the business aspirations are met using the investors' money. So it's a win-win situation both for the investors and the investee companies. Now, how is it regulated? So to start with, alternative investment funds is overseen by Securities and Exchange Board of India, which is the capital market regulator in India. There's a specific regulation which takes care of how this arena is working, what kind of funds can be floated, who can be an investment manager, what is the possible structure, So these regulations, were first published in 2012 and has evolved immensely thereafter. And in the last 24 months, one has seen the most number of changes that which we can actually think of in these regulations. How can you structure an AIF? AIF typically will have the pooling vehicle, which is the fund. It will have the investment manager, which will manage the fund. And it will have the sponsor, which agrees to have a skin in the game, which is a minimum requirement. So it's a comfort to the investors that you are not putting everything at risk. It is also the sponsor which is taking the risk alongside by having his own money into the fund. And these are the three important elements into the fund structure. An AIF can be set up as a trust, as a LLP, or a company. The most prevalent structure is a trust structure, and therefore when we talk about in this session, we'll talk of a trust structure largely to start with. And because there is trust involved, we are also looking at who is settling the trust and who is the trustee to the fund. So the fund basically is a trust, and you will have a trustee who's like a father, has a fiduciary relationship with the trust, and is also reportable to SEBI in terms of whether the trust is functioning in lines with the regulations, and it oversees the functions of the investment manager also. When there is a trust structure, the trustee actually, settler and the trustee are the forming parties of the trust. And they enter into an investment management agreement, delegating the entire investment function to the investment manager. So this is how typically it is structured. In terms of categories of AIF, there are three large categories, and there are then subcategories. So we're talking of category 1 and category 2, which are largely private equity funds, which means that the theses would revolve around investing into private companies. It's a private arrangement, and generally they would not invest into listed space. There's another category, which is category 3, which will largely focus on listed space, but they can do everything what a category 1 and category 2 can do in terms of the areas in which they can invest. When we talk of category 1, there are many, but I'm focusing on 3 large divisions. One is category 1 VCF, which is a pooling vehicle. It works very similar to category 2, which is also a pooling vehicle, but the difference between a VCF and a category 2 will be the areas in which they can invest and the types of securities that they can invest. While SEBI has recently opened up category 1 VCF as well for a lot of things, and only 75% is ring fenced. So you have 25% of the avenue to invest into others. There's another category where it's called angel fund. Auxano has an angel fund set up. Largely, angel funds are meant to be for smaller investors, but it will have it has a net worth requirement for individuals and companies when they want to invest or agree to invest into an angel fund. At the same time, the concept of angel fund says that the investor gets to agree or not agree when the investment theses are shared for a particular portfolio entity. So for example, if Auxano Angel Fund investment manager wants to invest into portfolio A, it will come to all its investors and take an approval, giving all the details of the portfolio company and allow the investors to agree to invest. So it's a matching concept kind of a fund. The major difference between a category 1 VCF and an angel fund will be that the minimum contribution commitment required by an investor is 25 lakhs in an angel fund versus 1 crore rupees in any other category of the fund. There are some exceptions which we can cover later, but largely it is 25 lakhs into an angel fund versus 1 crore in category 1 and category 2. Again, there's one more category which is recently being floated by SEBI, which is called as a special situations fund, is largely to take care of the bad assets, bad loans, and what a asset reconstruction company would generally do, including investing into security receipts which are floated by ERCs. So it has just picked up, I would say, not talking about it much. Coming to category 2, it works as a pooling vehicle, which will mean that, again, Auxano has a category 2 fund now. And talking about category 2, it's a pooling vehicle, as I said, which means that the monies are pooled into the fund, and the right to invest into portfolio entities out of that money is completely vested on the investment manager. There is no separate approval required from the investors, and largely the investors rely on the abilities and the experience of the investment manager to build the portfolio. Category 3, I'm not talking about much. It is, as I said, it's a listed space. Hedge funds, long only, long short. These are the strategies that category 3 normally work on. Anything else that I missed, Brijesh?
No, Kriyang, this was very detailed, very laymanish. So I would say even a class, even a year 12 kid should understand and decipher with a lot of action happening on TV on this. But if so, what you're saying is that what we understand is, Cat 1 Angel, could be the vehicle for investors who would want to, taste this space. So can you tell us more on Cat 1 Angel, and so that the prospective investors who are listening, or watch this show, they also know what they can look at.
Definitely. So let me refresh what I said first. Cat 1 Angel Fund is a subcategory of category 1 alternative investment fund. There are set of regulations which are carved out specifically for an angel fund. An angel fund will literally mean it's a fund for angel investors. Angel fund can typically invest into entities who have a turnover of less than 10 crore rupees, which are not existing for not more than 5 years. A fund can invest from up to 25 lakhs to 10 crore rupees into a particular investment entity. That's a restriction of sorts. So you cannot invest more than 10 crores in a particular entity. At the same time, the minimum commitment required by an investor in an angel fund is only 25 lakh rupees. The criteria of an individual investor's net worth requirement is INR 2 crores, which excludes his personal home where he is currently living. For a non-individual, the net worth requirement is 10 crores. It could be an LLP, a trust can invest, an HUF can invest, a company can invest. In an angel fund, like any other alternative investment funds, there is absolutely no restriction for a foreign citizen or a non-resident to invest. So in technical terms, under the exchange control regulations in India, which we call as FEMA, it comes under automatic route. So RBI has allowed anyone and everyone to come in and invest into an angel fund or a category 2 fund. Who cannot invest into an angel fund is a foreign portfolio investor, which is registered with SEBI and who has an Indian bank account, cannot invest in an angel fund. So that's a restriction. In terms of operations, the angel fund typically again works as a pooling vehicle to start with. the investors come along, bring money. The investment manager will do the due diligence, find companies for investment purposes, prepare a pitch deck, go to investors, and take their consent to say, okay, here is the portfolio A, which is typically called as scheme 1 in an angel fund. So I'm investing into a scheme, the portfolio company name is so and so. Here is what the entity does. Here is why I am thinking, the investment manager is thinking that I want to invest into this company. Let me know what you think. If you approve, we will include your contributions into a pool. And the investors who agree, their pool is then parked into the portfolio entity. People who do not agree, their commitment remains intact. And then when the next opportunity of investment comes in, again, the investment manager does the same process. So it is possible that scheme 1 out of the 50 investors, for example, Auxano Angel Fund may have, it's possible that in scheme 1, you'll have first 40. Largely, I believe that this is a rare case, because when an investor invests into an angel fund or looking at who the investment manager is, I've rarely seen anybody disapproving a particular investment opportunity, right? But I'm just giving an example as to how theoretically it will work, if at all. And in scheme 2, you will have another 40 investors who are not common. So you will have uncommon investors between scheme 1 and scheme 2. In terms of payouts, obviously, when there is an exit, you will have 2 or 3 layers of distribution waterfall. 1 is return of capital. 2 is if there is any hurdle agreed by the investment manager. 3, if there is a hurdle, investment managers will all obviously catch up to that hurdle. So there's a catch up required, largely equivalent to the hurdle and catch up put together. And the 4th leg is the additional return allocation, and depends on what percentage you agreed with the investment manager. But it's an effort-based allocation which the investment manager will call for from the investors to share the revenue. So this is how the largely the structure will look like. I don't think I've missed anything on that front. Brijesh, you can let me know if I need to cover anything more on that.
So this is something which you talked about in the Cat and Angel, the process, how the investors can choose and go forward. So what are the if I talk from the legal side, what is the compliances, say, which a fund has to carry out? 1 on its own, and 2 towards the investors.
I think that is the most important question and haunting a lot of funds today. As I said, in the last 24 months, a lot of things have changed. And by that, I meant, yes, from regulations perspective, yes, of course. But from compliance perspective, also, a lot of things have been added. So let me take it sequentially. And when an investor agrees or is in the process of agreeing to invest into a fund, so typically Auxano will have to go back to the investor asking for their PAN and date of birth. Check if their CKYC is in place. CKYC is nothing but a central know your customer database, which is available for access through registration by a fund. And check if that investor is already complying. What it means? It means that the identity proof, address proof, and any other document, including PAN or Aadhaar card or whatever, is already part of the KYC database. If the answer is yes, the investment manager will send a contribution agreement, which is nothing but an agreement. It replicates the terms of the PPM and is put in writing and is stamped and signed by all 3 parties. We talked about the trust structure, so I'm talking about 3 parties. One is the investor himself. The second is trustee. and the third is the investment manager. And that agreement forms part of the basis of the arrangement between the investor and the investment manager. It will typically have the commitment amount, basically how much you've committed. The question is whether what I've committed is required to be paid upfront. The answer is no. There's a phased drawdown. So it's like a building under construction. You don't pay the entire amount upfront. The builder will tell you slab 1 is over, please pay so much. Here, the investment manager will tell you slab 1 is under construction, please pay me so much so that I can complete the investment process. So it's a phased drawdown. It's not a one-time kind of a payment, lump sum payment requirement. So coming back to KYC process, the investment manager will send a contribution agreement and PPM to the investors, and the onboarding is complete. If the investor does not have a KYC, then the KYC documents are going to be called for, uploaded on CKYC portal, which can happen parallel to signing of contribution agreement and sending of PPM and finalizing the agreement. So the only condition here is the investor is agreeing to provide all the KYC documents. The third possibility is that you have a foreign investor who does not have a PAN, and the process starts from obtaining a PAN, and then the KYC process, as I discussed earlier, because if the investor does not have a PAN, it definitely does not comply with the KYC norms, because PAN is mandated to complete your CKYC. So if once the CKYC process is completed, we discussed that there's a contribution agreement and PPM to be sent to the investors. So we've covered that part of compliance. When the money comes in, RBI comes into picture. If the investments come from foreign bank account or a NRE account in India, both triggers INV filing, as we call it, and they largely come from FEMA Non-Debt Instruments Rule 2019. It is a reporting to RBI to say that there is a foreign inward remittance. Typically, that it's pre-existing in a form of a company, but fund is required to follow a different platform. The next step is the fund has to decide whether it has enough money to start the fund. And I'm not getting into details, but it will inform SEBI that I'm ready to start the fund and deploy the funds, and there'll be a first drawdown. The first drawdown can also happen immediately on signing the contribution agreement, or at the prerogative of the investment manager at a later time. When the drawdown happens, there's an allocation made by the investment manager to management fee or operating expenses, and the rest is parked aside for investment purposes. There's a quarterly SEBI compliance which is triggered. I'll cover the SEBI part first now, which entails quarterly reporting to SEBI about the activities of the fund. It will largely include how big is the fund, what is the money that you've garnered until now, total commitment, total drawdown, total utilization, which sectors have you invested into, how much money is still with you and you've parked in mutual funds, what kind of investors are there in your fund, nature of investors, individual, non-individual, resident, non-resident, LLP, trust, all those details, plus the amount they've committed. All those details go to SEBI on a quarterly basis. So the fund manager is required to be on the top of the game with all the MIS, at least on a quarterly basis, to allow it to comply with the SEBI regulation. In addition to that, I informed you earlier that the trustee is the father of the fund. So it checks whether everything is being taken care of, because the entire functions are delegated to the investment manager. The trustee will ask the investment manager to send a trustee compliance report, which is nothing but an assurance and a check from the trustee's side that the compliance are made. So we can easily assume that with a good fortified structure, it is impossible for the investment manager to falter on compliances. Yes, there could be errors, and those are all human errors, but it is not possible for an investment manager to say that I've not filed something, right? The third one from SEBI's perspective is the compliance test report, which is a test report to be given by the sponsors to the trustees. And it is nothing but, again, a summary of the entire it looks at the entire PPM clauses and talks about whether you complied with 1, 2, 3, etc. It's a 10-15 page report. And again, another level of compliance check, I would say. SEBI also mandates a fund to annually provide its investors a brief about what sort happened in the fund. So it gives financial information of the fund. It gives information about the investee companies, the risk attributes, any other information that or changes in the fund that the investment manager wants to inform to its investors. All of that comes as an annual report to the investors. Typically, it is required to be given within 180 days of the close of the year. That's what the regulation says. So the fourth one is the valuation part. Valuation, the SEBI regulations mandate that it has to be a 6-monthly valuation of the portfolio entities, which will also probably derive a fictional NAV. It's not a realized NAV, obviously. It's a fictional net asset value of the portfolio entities put together. And with the consent of the investor, the investment manager may cut down some costs and say that I'll do an annual valuation to start with, because typically in a private equity fund kind of a scenario, there's hardly any movement in the portfolio entities functioning, and therefore hardly any movement in the value. So the investment manager may go out and ask the consent of the investors to allow a yearly valuation instead. So these are the SEBI compliances. In terms of RBI, we already covered one, which was in terms of inwards, foreign inwards. The second one is annual filing of foreign liabilities and assets return, typically due in July, which again talks of what is that. It's a data collection process by the RBI to say that what is that India owes outside and receivable from outside. So each financial institution or a company will provide this data back to RBI to collect the statistics. In addition to that, there are a couple of others like legal entity identifier number, which is required to be quoted on every foreign transactions that the fund makes. It is a one-time registration. There is no other compliance attached to that. And the fourth one is a monitoring bit. It is a registration with the Fraud Investigation Unit, FIU. And I have not seen any compliances coming to the fund in this regard, unless there is some suspicious activity which the investment manager believes that is required to be reported in consultation with the bank, because the bank is also involved when the money comes in. So these are the RBI compliances. In terms of tax compliances, there is income tax return like every other institution has. The trust has to file an income tax return. Very interestingly, the income tax law has devised a way in which the investors will get to know what they have earned during the year, what is the tax withholding happening during the year for each of the investors. So just taking a step back, the trust is a pass-through from tax perspective, especially the category 1 and category 2. What does this mean? It means that if I am an investor in Auxano and Auxano is investing into a portfolio entity, the tax authorities assume that I have invested in the portfolio entity directly. And there is only a SPV in form of a category 1 or category 2 sitting in between, which will take care of the tax compliances. So what does the fund do? The fund withholds taxes on profits on a yearly basis. Either it's a profit or a loss. It passes on to the investors in the form of 64C. It talks about the categorization of the income, short-term, long-term, whether it is listed, unlisted, what is the rate applied, everything, interest, dividend, everything. And that form, basically, it is a basis for the investors to populate its personal income tax return, whether it's a company or an individual. And there's a corresponding form required to be filed by the fund to the income tax authorities, which is in 64D, and both match. Obviously, now after filing the 64, like we generate a TDS certificate, Form 64C is required to be generated and passed on. So obviously they will match. The idea is twofold. One, the income tax authorities must know which PAN has earned what income from the fund. Two, investors should know what they have to report. So there's an automatic reconciliation. From income tax perspective, there is another important aspect in my favorite subject, which is called as FATCA and CRS. And I did not cover that in the onboarding part because it has a lot of other ramifications as well. So at the time of onboarding, there is, in addition to the KYC document, all the investors, whether they are resident, non-resident, whether they are individuals or non-individuals, they are required to declare in the FATCA CRS form about their KYC details, their business details, their tax residential status, especially for an individual, their citizenship status, and there are other smaller details. Plus, if you are a foreign individual, you are mandated to provide your tax identification number. This tax identification number, many people are reluctant to give, but for a fund manager, it is mandatory to collect that information for two purposes. One is, of course, FATCA, as we discussed, and it is also required to give you benefit of the tax treaties with your respective countries, and also reduce your tax liabilities in India. And the investment manager, by giving that tax benefits to you, is required to quote your tax identification number in the TDS returns, the tax withholding returns. So coming back to FATCA, for a non-individual, the FATCA form is a little bit complicated. And just to give you a quick summary, typically an entity which is only earning income from passive sources would include rent, royalty, interest, dividend, capital gains, are largely impacted. If an entity is a passive entity by definition under FATCA, it is also required to provide its controlling person details and also whether they are residents or non-residents. From that data, the investment manager will derive as to which investors are reportable back to the income tax authorities. The income tax authorities will take this report and disseminate to respective countries, US, Singapore. There are 169 countries who have agreed to this law. And there will be a reconciliation happening at the country level, whether that non-resident has filed, declared its worldwide income to the home country, right? So FATCA and CRS is also very, very important. It forms part of the tax laws. And lastly, as I told you, there's a withholding tax return which is required, which will include investor payments as well as the fund expenses. So this is largely from compliance perspective. I don't think I've missed anything, but if I have, please let me know, Brijesh.
So the last 2 years, a lot of action happening on the compliance part, and
yeah,
the flow
I've not covered one. Typically not applicable to angel funds, but I'll be happy to do that too.
I think you can come to that,
Okay.
but before that, with the compliance is only increasing, and which is positive for the investors and the prospective investors who wants to participate in this asset class. Now,
absolutely,
both on the FATCA and the valuation part. So today, when you invest in India, so be it mutual funds or opening a demat account, the FATCA is already being asked for. It is already there in place. So when you invest again, so let's say I invested in a mutual fund in India, in which already have a FATCA in place. Weeks, days from time, I open a demat account, and again I'm asked for the FATCA, though I have already done the FATCA. Right. So when I'm investing again in after a month's time in an AIF, again I'm asked for the FATCA, but the details are the same. So since I already have once done, do I have to do it always?
Okay, good question. Very good question. So I'll give you a very simple example, Brijesh. Suppose I'm sitting in India today working, right? Tomorrow I'm hired at the US in a US company, and I go to the US tomorrow. In the next 182 days, my tax residential status will change. So my FATCA declaration, which was already in place on records, has already undergone a change. This is also true for passive entities whose controlling persons we have called for declaration. So the status of the controlling persons who are required to be individuals, that tax residential status is also going to change, is likely to change. So the idea is to make sure that there's a ongoing due diligence, and each financial institution separately is required to have this information in place. It cannot rely on what your affiliate intermediaries are collecting. For example, you are dealing with a custodian or a bank as part of your operations. You cannot rely on the FATCA declarations which your bank has collected. It is an independent activity and documentation required at your end. Same for CKYC. If I have a bank account today, I definitely have a CKYC number and I'm compliant. But the fund is required to still have those documents as part of its records because that is the law. I hope I answered your question.
Fine, that helps because, this is one query which is always you have.
Yeah.
The other part, on the valuation part, which is undertaken, so it is typically by a registered valuer, right? That is, so it's not any number which an investment manager can pluck out and put in, right?
So okay, if you're asking me how this works in the process, so just one small point here. It's not required to be a registered valuer. Even a chartered accountant can do it.
Okay.
Or a company who understands the valuation can do it. So that's not mandated under SEBI law. Only under certain transactions which under law are required to have a registered valuation done or a merchant banker valuation done. At that point it triggers. But from SEBI valuation perspective, anyone can do the valuation. The most important part of the valuation is the methodology which is adopted. In most cases, especially into private equity kind of an arrangement, you will have new investors coming in almost every year. There are rounds happening, financing rounds happening every year. In most cases, therefore, the valuation is pretty straightforward to say that there's a round of finance happened in, which is not less than 6 months old, and I will want to rely on that valuation as the valuation of my investment. That is one method. Two, if it's a fairly new company and still on a in a growing stage, no other investors, I would rather do a DCF and so when I invested, I did some calculations and I would want to see how what has changed and how this can be valued today using the same method. So that is point number two. And the third is companies which are not even moved for an inch from the last year and still at an ideation stage, etc. So there the proposition becomes very difficult. But to summarize, valuation exercise is an independent exercise, something that the investors can rely on. It cannot be an affiliate of the investment manager. It cannot be done by people who are working as a group. It has to be an independent valuer. And at the same time, I explained that there are various ways in which valuation exercise can be completed. And typically, the fund manager may, if called for, share the valuation report with the investors to look at. So the crux of this discussion was that investment manager cannot play around the valuations that are put up or the NAV that is communicated to the investors. It is bound to be legitimate. It may not be accurate, obviously, it cannot be accurate, but it is bound to be legitimate in all senses.
So today we have covered, what is an AIF, what are the regulation around it, what are the investors' rights on that, what is the compliance on that part. So we looked into whole I would say the juggernaut and how it works. So over a period of time, what is the if we can say number of AIFs being set up, and how easy it is now to set up?
We're talking of 900 odd alternative investment funds plus schemes which are out there today. And I believe at least 250 of them have happened in the last 3 or 4 months. Okay, that's my estimate of the kind of work that is out there. How easy it is? Very interestingly, in February 2020, in its circular, SEBI has actually standardized the PPM format. So there cannot be any deviation in the PPM format. And it is more so, and largely it is divided into 4 sections. One is your investment thesis and how will you do it? Who is going to take care of the fund, the governance structure? What are the commercial terms? And what is the other information that the investor should know? Like what are the laws, prevailing laws in India, tax laws, etc. These are the large 4 sections in which the entire PPM can be summed up. It is very, very standardized. So preparation, I believe, is going to be a process-driven matter unless there is a legal aspect, into it in terms of if there's an offshore structure involved, or if there's a tax structuring involved, or we're looking at laws which like asset reconstruction companies or investment there too, or special situation funds where more than 3 or 4 other laws are also touched upon in addition to the regular ones, right? So formation is in our view is a 1 month process for the entire structure, depending on 30 days to between 30 days and 50 days. And it includes trustee, the trust deed, which involves trustee, settler. It involves preparation of the investment management agreement, the private placement memorandum, and then the contribution agreement. And there's an online application which is required to be made to SEBI after paying the fees. After making the application, typically SEBI comes with all the questions, and there's a lot of iteration which happens. There's a comfort required, and the approval comes between 2.5 to 4 months, depending on how busy SEBI is, which officer is looking at it, how deep, how good is your document, right? Another interesting angle which has come into play now is that before you make an application, there's a merchant banker certificate required. So the merchant banker actually tells SEBI that, okay, I have had a look at the PPM and I have already looked into these clauses and they are in place. So it cuts down SEBI's job to half. And I believe that the funds who have submitted their applications with merchant banker certificate should get faster, approvals, is what my understanding is, and so how it's going to work. Not only that, there's an annual merchant banker certificate also required for filing of PPM. So SEBI wants to take comfort from a third party to say that the rules and regulations around basically the AIF framework is being adhered to, and the PPM is in line. Coming back to the formation, as I said, you can assume that it typically takes about 4 months for the entire structure to set up, be it category 1, 2, or 3.
So you see the cost structure for an AIF, can typically go up, and they'll always push and pull with the investors on that.
No, definitely. Not only that, before you even float the fund, as I told you, there's an onboarding process, right? That onboarding process itself is so daunting that before you start deploying money, you will feel that you run half of the fund already, right? In terms of work. Yes, it is a long drawn process. It is becoming costlier because of the kind of parties that are involved, number of parties that are involved now. But at the same time, as I said, the PPM is now a standard format. So I believe that takes care of a lot of hassles in terms of how is this going to be prepared, whether I can do this, with not with a lawyer and just have it vetted by a lawyer after I made it. All these things obviously come into picture, and I think it can salvage some costs.
Okay, one more question which I have, so based on experience on setting up, AIFs all over, both in India and the US.
Mhm.
What is your recommendation, for the smooth establishment and management of an AIF? One, by both uh, by the investment manager and to the investors.
Okay. So, first of all, if an investment manager in India would like to set up a US fund, right? It comes into different shapes. And I'm not going to touch upon FEMA on this because it's a completely different topic. I'm assuming that the fund will be managed. You'll have a GP, sitting out of the US, and the Indian company will largely advise the GP in terms of where to invest in India, or it could be a feeder fund to the India fund as well. US from timelines perspective is much more favorable. Cost perspective, I would say it is only a bit costlier than what you will probably end up paying in India, because we are talking US dollars, the lawyer's fee, etc. But in terms of compliances, one needs to be very, very careful because we are dealing with uh, an unknown territory, which is called as the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the laws there in terms of Dodd-Frank or reporting perspective from investors who invest from outside of the US are daunting. And there, the in these areas, basically the legal firms come into play and advise you and do's and don'ts. But my experience has been that even after having that, um, US has been uh, favored because it is quick. There are less compliances. Ongoing costs can be salvaged definitely, um, and it gives a comfort to the US investors as well to say that they're investing into a local fund rather than coming into India, obtaining PAN and all of that, right? But I just want to add one more aspect here. We have Gift City, so that is going to take care of a lot of hassles that we are talking about. And I believe in the time to come, they will also reduce a lot of compliances which are called for. See, India, you must understand that AIF in India or a Gift City compliances, where is this all coming from? It is coming from monitoring past experiences of, of the world financial institutions, which they've and the issues that they've faced, and also the kind of terrorist activities that prevail in this region. So we have to be very careful in terms of who is investing, where is money coming from, and the ongoing monitoring requirements. Right? And that's probably the major difference between an AIF India and what you will probably end up setting up in the US. As I said, cost US setup cost is slightly more than India, but the ongoing cost could be definitely much lower than what you would end up spending in India.
Kriya, great. In fact, you have touched upon the entire spectrum of an AIF. Now, one final question, and which goes back to the first question. Like, besides you being a chartered accountant and you're setting up AIFs, traveling all over, you're also a trekker, musician, right? So how has that helped you in this journey?
So, I mean, personally, I've always made a point to keep meeting new people and not always from business perspective. And there, I believe I've learned a lot. And those casual discussions have gotten me into this space. To be very frank, I casually went to Singapore for FATCA CRS training, and I was never aware that that could be the foundation of me starting my own firm and doing this work. Traveling has definitely helped. Music has helped. It's very rare. People tell me it's very rare for someone to get into music alongside chartered account because you hardly breathe. But it's a fact. Even me and my team hardly breathe. Today, SEBI is keeping us busy. But I believe though a couple of hours off for travel, spending time with your kid, uh, doing music with him alongside doing music for yourself, um, it throws upon a space for ideation. So many times I've found myself writing down some ideas or notes or some to-dos which I would not have otherwise come across to myself in these important times of of doing music or traveling. I don't know, it was very vague, but yeah, that's what I feel personally.
Fantastic. Good to have, things which can give you ideation also, in your day-to-day regular things which you do. So Kriyang, it's been a pleasure, to be associated with you, and it has been great pleasure talking to you. You have always
Likewise, Brijesh. Likewise.
You have been pretty open. It's like, if I can say in Hindi, "Pehle main deta hu, fir main dekhta hu kya milega." So, fantastic. I think if you the Bhagavad Gita, what it says is that you do your job, fruits will come to you. Don't
That's right.
look at the fruits.
I agree.
But that's the philosophical angle. But at the end of the day, we all are for doing business and be doing business with pleasure and enjoying every single moment.
Absolutely.
So thanks once again, to being able to be part of Auxano Bytes. This short session is going to be, I believe, the is summarized version of of the AIF, right, for someone who wants to set up, or to investors who's wanting to look at this this area as an asset allocation model. And when coming from an expert, it's fantastic for everyone to hear from the horse's mouth. So
absolutely, thank you so much, Brijesh.
Thanks once again, Kriyang, and
thank
have a great day and a great weekend ahead. And wish you a glorious years ahead.
Thank you so much, Brijesh. Thank you.
Thank you.